The Desperate Hour. June 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy had begun, and British tank crews were dying at an alarming rate. The standard Sherman tanks, workhorses of the Allied armored divisions, were being systematically destroyed by German Tigers and Panthers at ranges where their own 75mm guns couldn't even scratch the enemy's armor. Tank crews had nicknamed their Shermans Ronsons after the cigarette lighter because they lit up first time every time when hit by German shells. Major George Wytheridge of the Royal Tank Regiment sat in a briefing room in southern England, staring at casualty reports that made his blood run cold. In their last engagement, his squadron had lost 12 tanks to just 3 German Tigers. The mathematics of war were simple and brutal. German tanks could destroy Shermans at 2,000 yards, while the Sherman's gun was only effective at 500 yards or less against the heavily armored German cats. It was murder, not warfare. But Wytheridge had heard rumors. Whispers in the officers' mess about a secret project, something the Boffins at the Royal Armored Corps had been working on. A modification so audacious that even experienced tank designers had initially dismissed it as impossible. They called it the Firefly, and it was about to change everything. The genesis of the Firefly had actually begun months earlier, born from desperation and British ingenuity. When intelligence reports confirmed that German armor was far superior to anything the Allies possessed, British engineers faced a stark choice: accept devastating casualties or find a way to even the odds. The Americans had tried and failed to mount larger guns on the Sherman. The British, however, had something the Americans didn't: the magnificent 17-pounder anti-tank gun. The 17-pounder was a beast of a weapon, capable of penetrating 140 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards, enough to punch through a Tiger's frontal armor. But it was designed as a towed anti-tank gun, not a tank weapon. Fitting it into a Sherman turret was like trying to stuff a howitzer into a telephone booth. The gun was too long, the breech too large, and the recoil would tear the tank apart. Every expert who looked at the problem declared it impossible. Every expert except one. Major George Brighty, a determined engineer at the Royal Armored Corps, refused to accept defeat. Working with his team through countless sleepless nights, they performed what amounted to mechanical surgery on the Sherman. They turned the gun sideways, modified the recoil system, and redesigned the turret interior completely. Radio equipment was relocated, the loader's position was reconfigured, and they even had to cut away part of the turret bustle. The first prototype had been tested in secret at Lulworth Cove. When a massive gun fired, observers held their breath, expecting the turret to be ripped from the hull. Instead, the shell screamed downrange and obliterated a target plate that simulated a Tiger's armor. The impossible had been achieved. The Sherman Firefly was born, and with it, the Allies finally had a tank that could kill German armor at range. But would it arrive in time to make a difference? And more importantly, would the German tank aces, who had grown accustomed to their invincibility, know how to respond when they suddenly became the hunted instead of the hunters? The monster's birth. The workshop at the Royal Armored Corps Depot in Woolwich was a cacophony of metal on metal, sparks flying from welding torches, and a constant hammering of modifications being made at breakneck speed. Lieutenant Colonel William Wilder watched as crews worked around the clock, transforming standard Sherman tanks into Fireflies. Each conversion took 200 man-hours, and they needed hundreds of them before D-Day. The technical challenges had been staggering. The 17-pounder gun was originally 16 feet long, far too long for a tank turret designed for a much smaller weapon. The solution was elegantly brutal. They mounted the gun sideways, rotating at 90 degrees to fit it through the turret ring, then turned it back once inside. The radio operator's position had to be eliminated entirely, with the radio equipment redistributed throughout the fighting compartment. Ammunition storage was reconfigured, with rounds stored vertically instead of horizontally. But the real genius was in the gun's mounting. Engineers developed a new recoil system that absorbed the massive forces generated when the gun fired. The entire turret had to be reinforced with additional armor plating, and a distinctive armored box was added to the rear of the turret to accommodate the gun's recoil mechanism. This gave the Firefly its characteristic humpbacked appearance that would soon strike fear into German tank crews. Sergeant James Morrison was among the first tank commanders selected to train on the Firefly. A veteran of North Africa, he'd seen too many friends burn in their tanks, victims of the German 88mm guns. When he first saw the Firefly's massive gun barrel, extending far beyond the hull of the tank, he whistled in appreciation. Finally, he muttered, "A gun that can reach out and touch someone back." Training was intensive and crucial. The Firefly's gun had a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second, compared to the standard Sherman's 2,030 feet per second. This meant flatter trajectories, better accuracy at range, and most importantly, the ability to penetrate German armor at distances previously thought impossible for Allied tanks. But it also meant new gunnery tables, new techniques, and a complete revision of tank tactics. The crews quickly discovered the Firefly's quirks. The massive gun created an enormous muzzle blast that kicked up dust and debris, potentially giving away their position. The long barrel made maneuvering in tight spaces difficult. More than one trainee got their gun barrel tangled in hedgerows during exercises. The elimination of the hull machine gunner meant the crew was reduced from 5 to 4 men, increasing the workload on everyone. Yet despite these challenges, morale soared. Tank crews who had resigned themselves to being sitting ducks suddenly had hope. Word spread quickly through the armored regiments. "Have you heard about the Firefly?" became the most common question in mess halls. Stories, some true, some exaggerated, circulated about test firings where the 17-pounder had punched through captured German armor like it was made of butter. By May 1944, just weeks before D-Day, 342 Fireflies had been completed. Each British armored troop of 4 tanks would have one Firefly, carefully positioned to provide overwatch for the standard Shermans. It wasn't enough to give every crew the upgraded gun, but it was enough to change the tactical balance. The Allies finally had a tank killer that could match the German Cats. The only question now was whether the German tank aces, comfortable in their superiority, would adapt to this new threat or fall victim to their own overconfidence. Tiger Hunter, Normandy, July 1944. The hedgerows of the Bocage country had become a tanker's nightmare. Staff Sergeant Joe Ekins of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry peered through his Firefly's periscope, scanning the thick Norman countryside. 3 weeks had passed since D-Day, and the Allied advance had bogged down in this maze of ancient hedgerows and sunken lanes. Perfect terrain for German ambushes. Ekins was just 21 years old, but war had aged him beyond his years. His Firefly, christened Cahane's Killer, sat hull down behind a hedgerow, its long 17-pounder barrel protruding through the foliage like a steel finger pointing toward destiny. The 3 standard Shermans in his troop were positioned nearby, their crews nervous and alert. Everyone knew the Germans were out there, somewhere. Intelligence had reported elements of the 1st SS Panzer Corps in the area, including the feared Tiger tanks of Schwehr SS Panzerabteilung 101. These were Michael Wittmann's units, the most successful tank ace in history, credited with destroying 138 tanks and 132 anti-tank guns. Wittmann's reputation preceded him like a dark shadow. Allied tank crews spoke his name in hushed tones, as if saying it too loudly might summon him. The morning of August 8th dawned misty and cool. Ekins had positioned his Firefly carefully, using the British doctrine that had emerged from hard experience. The Firefly would hang back, using its superior gun range, while the standard Shermans maneuvered to spot targets. It was a deadly game of chess where one wrong move meant burning alive in a steel coffin. At 12:20 hours, the radio crackled to life. Tigers. 3 Tigers moving across the field at 2 o'clock, range 800 yards. Ekins swung his turret, and there they were, 3 massive Tiger tanks advancing across an open field, confident in their armor's invincibility. The lead Tiger's commander was visible in his cupola, scanning with binoculars. Even at this distance, the Tigers looked invulnerable, their 88mm guns sweeping back and forth like predators seeking prey. Ekins' gunner, Trooper Leslie Hewitt, already had the lead Tiger in his sights. "Target acquired," he said calmly, though sweat beaded on his forehead. Ekins watched through his periscope as Hewitt made minute adjustments. The Firefly's APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot, round was already loaded, a devastating projectile that could penetrate 200 millimeters of armor at this range. Fire! The Firefly rocked backward as the 17-pounder roared. The shell crossed the 800 yards in less than a second, striking the lead Tiger just below the turret ring. The massive German tank stopped dead, smoke pouring from the impact point. Before the Germans could react, Hewitt had already reloaded. The second shot hit the second Tiger in the frontal armor, penetrating cleanly and causing an internal explosion that blew the turret clean off. The third Tiger, suddenly realizing it was under attack from a gun that could actually hurt it, began reversing frantically, its turret swinging to find the threat. But Hewitt was faster. The third APDS round caught the Tiger in the side as it turned, the shell penetrating the thinner side armor and detonating the ammunition. The Tiger erupted in a pillar of flame that could be seen for miles. In less than 12 seconds, Joe Ekins and his crew had destroyed 3 Tigers, a feat that would become legendary in the annals of tank warfare. The hunters had become the hunted, and the age of German tank invincibility had come to a shocking end. Whitman's last stand. SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Whitman stood in the cupola of his Tiger tank, number 007, studying the morning mist that clung to the Norman countryside near Synthos. It was August 8, 1944, the same day that Joe Ekins would make history, though neither man knew of the other's existence yet. Whitman, the most celebrated tank ace of the war, had destroyed over 130 enemy tanks, but lately, something had changed. His crews were reporting a new threat. Sherman tanks with unusually long barrels that could kill at ranges previously thought safe. Whitman had first encountered a Firefly 3 weeks earlier near Villers-Bocage. His Tiger had been advancing with typical confidence when a shell screamed past, missing by mere inches. The range had been over 1,000 yards, impossible for a standard Sherman. His driver had instinctively reversed into cover, and Whitman had studied the enemy position through his binoculars. There was a Sherman with a gun barrel that seemed to stretch forever. Intelligence had warned about these modified tanks, but seeing one in action was different. For the first time in 2 years, Whitman had felt vulnerable. The German Tank Corps had adapted quickly. Orders came down from headquarters. Fireflies were to be prioritized targets. Their distinctive long barrels and muzzle brakes made them identifiable at distance. German tank commanders were instructed to engage them first, before they could bring their deadly guns to bear. But this created a paradox. Focusing on Fireflies meant ignoring standard Shermans, which could still be dangerous at close range. Whitman gathered his crew that morning for what would be his final briefing. "The British have given their Shermans teeth," he told them. "But they're still Shermans. Thin armor, high profile. We must be smart. Use the terrain, strike fast, and never give them time to aim." His gunner, Heinrich Reimers, nodded grimly. They had been together since Russia, an eternity in tank warfare. At 12:47 hours, Whitman's Tiger emerged from a wood line with 2 other Tigers from his company. They had spotted a column of British tanks, a mixed force of Shermans and Fireflies from the Sherbrooke Fusilier Regiment and the Northamptonshire Yeomanry. Whitman's tactical genius immediately grasped the situation. The Fireflies were hanging back, as they always did, while the standard Shermans pushed forward. He would have to brave their fire to get within effective range. What followed was a brutal, swirling engagement that would become known as Whitman's last battle. His Tiger destroyed 2 Shermans in rapid succession, his 88mm gun proving its worth once more. But as he maneuvered for a third kill, multiple Fireflies opened up from concealed positions. The British had learned too. They were using coordinated tactics, with Fireflies positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. A 17-pounder shell struck Whitman's Tiger in the left side, penetrating the armor but not causing immediate catastrophic damage. Reimers returned fire, destroying a Firefly with a perfect shot to the turret. But more shells were incoming. The British had numbers and positioning. Another APDS round struck the Tiger's rear, damaging the engine. Smoke filled the fighting compartment. Whitman's final moments remain controversial. Some accounts say his Tiger was hit by a rocket-firing Typhoon aircraft. Others credit Canadian tanks attacking from a flank. But most evidence points to Fireflies delivering the killing blows. Multiple 17-pounder rounds struck Tiger 007 in rapid succession. The ammunition cooked off, and the Tiger exploded with such violence that Whitman's body was thrown clear. The greatest tank ace in history was dead at age 30, killed by the very weapon he had learned to fear. The Firefly had claimed its most prestigious victim, forever changing the psychological dynamic of tank warfare on the Western Front. The Killing Fields of Falaise. August 1944, the Falaise Pocket. What military historians would later call the beginning of the end for German forces in Normandy was, for the tank crews trapped inside, nothing short of apocalypse. Captain Sidney Radley Walters of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers commanded a troop of tanks that included 2 Fireflies, and they were about to participate in one of the most decisive armored engagements of the Western Front. The German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were being squeezed into an ever-shrinking pocket around Falaise. Hitler's refusal to authorize a withdrawal had doomed nearly 100,000 German soldiers to encirclement. Among them were the remnants of some of Germany's most elite panzer divisions, including survivors from Whitman's unit, now fighting desperately to break out eastward toward the Seine. Radley Walters positioned his Fireflies on Hill 117, overlooking the main escape route the Germans would have to use. The killing ground below was a narrow corridor, perhaps 2,000 yards wide, through which the entire German escape attempt would have to funnel. He had learned from intelligence reports that the Germans now called Fireflies long barrels, and had standing orders to eliminate them at all costs. This fear could be used as a weapon itself. As dawn broke on August 19th, the valley below erupted into movement. German vehicles of every description began flooding through: trucks, half-tracks, tanks, horse-drawn wagons, and thousands of infantry on foot. It was a target-rich environment, but Radley Walters was hunting bigger game. He knew the Panthers and remaining Tigers would provide cover for the withdrawal. At 0800 hours, they appeared. A column of Panthers moving in tactical formation, protecting the flanks of the retreating army. Radley Walters' Firefly gunner, Sergeant Hughes, had already calculated the range, 1,800 yards. At this distance, a standard Sherman would be helpless, but the Firefly's 17-pounder could penetrate the Panthers' frontal armor with ease. The first shot was crucial. If they missed, the Panthers would locate them and respond with their own deadly 75mm guns. Hughes breathed slowly, making final adjustments for wind and the slight uphill angle. The crosshairs settled on the lead Panther's hull. Fire! The Firefly bucked, and the APDS round flew true. The Panthers stopped abruptly, smoke pouring from a perfect hole in its glassy plate. The crew began bailing out, but Hughes was already tracking the second target. What followed was methodical destruction on an industrial scale. The 2 Fireflies in Radley Walters' troop destroyed 13 German tanks in less than an hour, including 5 Panthers and a Tiger. The psychological effect was even more devastating than the physical damage. German tank crews, seeing their supposedly superior vehicles destroyed at ranges where they couldn't effectively respond, began abandoning operational tanks rather than face the Fireflies. The German tankers had developed a grudging respect, mixed with genuine fear for the Firefly. Captured German documents revealed that panzer crews had begun calling them Tommy Cookers, an ironic reversal of their own nickname for standard Shermans. Orders were found instructing German tanks to break contact if Fireflies were identified, unless they had overwhelming numerical superiority. By sunset, the Falaise Gap was littered with burning vehicles. The German army in Normandy had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. While many factors contributed to this victory, the Firefly had played a crucial psychological role. For the first time, Allied tank crews had not just parity but local superiority over German armor. The hunters of 1940 to 1943 had become the hunted of 1944, and the long barrels of the Fireflies had become symbols of Allied resurgence. The tide of armored warfare had turned, and there would be no turning back. The fear factor. In a prisoner of war camp near Portsmouth, England, Oberst Heinrich von Luttwitz, former commander of the 2nd Panzer Division, sat across from British intelligence officer Major David Hunt. The German officer, once proud and defiant, now seemed diminished, exhausted by weeks of retreat and defeat. Hunt was particularly interested in one aspect of the recent fighting: the psychological impact of the Firefly on German armored operations. "Your tanks," von Luttwitz began, lighting the cigarette Hunt had offered him, the ones with the long guns. "They changed everything." He exhaled slowly, remembering. "My men had fought in Poland, France, Russia. They had faced T-34s and KV-1s, tanks that could match our Panzers. But we always had superior tactics, better training. The Firefly took that advantage away." Von Luttwitz described how German tank tactics had been forced to evolve rapidly in response to the Firefly threat. The traditional German approach, aggressive, forward attacks relying on superior firepower and armor, became suicidal when Fireflies were present. Tank commanders who had operated with near impunity for years suddenly found themselves checking every hedgerow, every ridge line, for the telltale long barrel of the Firefly. The psychological impact extended beyond just the tank crews. German infantry, who had long relied on their panzers for support, began to lose confidence when they saw Tigers and Panthers burning from Firefly strikes. "You must understand," von Luttwitz explained, "for 4 years, the Tiger had been invincible in the minds of our soldiers. It was more than just a tank. It was a symbol of German superiority. When your Fireflies started killing Tigers at long range, that symbol shattered." British intelligence had intercepted German radio communications that confirmed von Luttwitz's account. Panzer commanders were requesting air reconnaissance, specifically to locate Fireflies before advancing. Some units had begun painting their gun barrels to make them appear longer, hoping to be mistaken for Fireflies and avoided. The fact that Germans were trying to impersonate the very weapon that had been destroying them spoke volumes about the psychological reversal that had occurred. The fear wasn't irrational. It was based on hard mathematics. A Firefly could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at 1,500 yards, while the Tiger needed to close to within 900 yards to have a reasonable chance of penetrating the Firefly's turret armor with a direct hit. This 600-yard advantage was the difference between life and death in tank combat. German crews knew these numbers, and they haunted their every engagement. Von Luttwitz revealed that German tank schools had begun running special courses on Firefly engagement tactics by late July 1944. The primary lesson: never engage a Firefly in open terrain. Use ambush tactics, close range, and overwhelming numbers. But these tactics negated many of the advantages German armor had enjoyed. Their superior optics, better training, and mechanical reliability meant less when combat was reduced to point-blank ambushes. The most telling sign of the Firefly's psychological impact came from the German home front. Letters from Panzer crews to their families, intercepted by Allied intelligence, showed a marked change in tone after the Normandy battles. Where once there had been confidence and pride, now there was fatalism and fear. One young Tiger commander wrote to his wife, "The British have a new gun that makes our armor meaningless. We are no longer hunters, but the hunted." The transformation was complete. The Firefly had not just evened the playing field. It had reversed the entire psychology of armored warfare in Western Europe. The race to the Rhine. September 1944. The liberation of Paris had been achieved, and Allied forces were racing eastward toward the German border. Operation Market Garden was in the planning stages, and tank crews were pushing their machines to the limit in pursuit of the retreating Wehrmacht. Among them was Sergeant Gordon Tribe of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, commanding a Firefly that had survived the Normandy battles and was now leading the charge across France. The nature of warfare had changed dramatically since the hedgerow fighting of June and July. Now it was a war of movement, of rapid advances and hasty defenses. The Firefly, originally conceived as a defensive tank killer, had to adapt to this new reality. Its long barrel, so advantageous in the open fields of Normandy, became a liability in the narrow streets of French towns. More than once, Tribe had to reverse his tank carefully to avoid knocking the gun barrel against buildings. But in the open countryside between towns, the Firefly reigned supreme. German rearguard actions, typically consisting of a few Panthers or assault guns positioned to delay the Allied advance, were particularly vulnerable to the Firefly's reach. Tribe's tank alone accounted for 7 German armored vehicles during the pursuit across France, most destroyed at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The psychological advantage the Firefly had gained in Normandy continued to grow. German tank crews, many of them replacements fresh from training schools, had heard the stories from Normandy veterans. They knew about the long barrels that could kill at impossible ranges. This fear often caused them to retreat prematurely, abandoning strong defensive positions at the first sight of a Firefly's distinctive profile. Near the Belgian border, Tribe's unit encountered one of the new German King Tiger tanks, the Tiger II. This behemoth weighed 70 tons and carried armor up to 185 millimeters thick on its turret front. It was, on paper, immune to almost any Allied anti-tank weapon. But the Firefly's APDS ammunition had been improved since Normandy. The new rounds could penetrate even the King Tiger's massive armor at certain angles. The engagement was brief but decisive. The King Tiger, confident in its invulnerability, had positioned itself in the open, covering a critical crossroads. Tribe's gunner, Corporal William Smith, took careful aim at the lower glacis plate, where the armor was angled less steeply. The first APDS round struck home, penetrating the armor and damaging the transmission. The King Tiger, immobilized, tried to traverse its turret toward the threat, but Smith's second round found the turret ring, jamming it in place. The crew abandoned the monster tank, leaving it as a monument to the Firefly's power. Word of a King Tiger being destroyed by a Firefly spread rapidly through both Allied and German ranks. If even a mighty King Tiger wasn't safe, what tank was? German armored doctrine, already shaken by the Normandy experience, began to completely unravel. Tank units that should have stood and fought instead conducted fighting withdrawals, always seeking to avoid the long-range engagement zones where Fireflies dominated. The American forces, who had initially been skeptical of the British modification, were now requesting Fireflies of their own. General George Patton, never one to admit British superiority in anything, privately wrote to Eisenhower that the British tank with the 17-pounder is worth 3 of our Shermans in a fight. Coming from Patton, this was the highest possible praise. By the time Allied forces reached the German border, the Firefly had become legendary. It was more than just a tank. It was a symbol of Allied innovation triumphing over German engineering, proof that the Wehrmacht's technological superiority could be overcome with ingenuity and determination. Legacy of the Long Barrel. March 1945. The war in Europe had only weeks left to run. In a tank depot near Munster, Germany, Captain Richard Thompson stood beside his battle-scarred Firefly, watching as newer tanks rolled off transport trains. The Comet tank had arrived, with its improved 77mm gun, and the Americans were fielding M26 Pershings with 90mm guns. The age of undergunned Allied tanks was over, but it had been the Firefly that had bridged the critical gap when it mattered most. Thompson's Firefly bore the scars of 9 months of combat. Shell impacts had left dents and gouges in the armor. The long barrel of the 17-pounder, once pristine, was now pitted and worn from hundreds of rounds fired. The tank had survived Normandy, the pursuit across France, the bitter winter fighting in the Ardennes, and now stood ready for the final push into the heart of Germany. It had become more than a machine. It was a testament to a revolution in armored warfare. The statistics told the story. Fireflies had accounted for more German armor kills per tank than any other Allied vehicle. Despite representing only 25% of British Sherman tanks, they had scored nearly 50% of the confirmed armor kills. German after-action reports, captured after the war, revealed that Firefly losses had been designated as priority achievements, worth more in commendations than destroying multiple standard Shermans. But the Firefly's impact went far beyond mere numbers. It had fundamentally altered the psychology of tank warfare. For the first 4 years of the war, German tankers had operated with the confidence that came from technical superiority. Their tanks were better armed, better armored, and in many cases, better designed than their opponents. The Firefly shattered that confidence, introducing doubt and fear where there had been certainty. The transformation was studied extensively by military theorists after the war. Colonel Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare, wrote in his memoirs, "The British Firefly was not just a technical achievement, but a psychological weapon. It proved that superiority in armored warfare was not permanent, that innovation could overcome advantage, and that the side which adapts fastest wins." The Firefly also changed how tanks were designed and deployed. The lesson was clear: firepower mattered more than armor. A tank that could destroy its enemies at long range was worth more than one that could absorb hits. This philosophy would dominate tank design throughout the Cold War, leading to the development of main battle tanks that prioritized gun performance over protection. Veterans of Firefly crews formed associations after the war, bound together by their unique experience. They had been David against Goliath, except David's sling had been a 17-pounder gun. Joe Ekins, who had destroyed 3 Tigers in 12 seconds, became a postman after the war, but was forever known as the man who proved Tigers could die. Sidney Radley Walters went on to become a successful businessman, but kept a shell casing from his Firefly on his desk until the day he died. The last operational Firefly in British service was retired in 1948, replaced by newer designs that incorporated the lessons learned. But the legacy lived on. Military museums around the world display Fireflies as examples of innovation under pressure, of how necessity truly is the mother of invention. The long barrel that had once struck fear into German hearts became a symbol of Allied determination and ingenuity. In the end, the Sherman Firefly was more than just a tank with a bigger gun. It was proof that technological superiority in warfare is temporary, that innovation can overcome advantage, and that sometimes the most important weapon in war is not steel or explosive, but the ability to adapt. The Firefly had started as a desperate attempt to match German armor. It ended as the tank that changed armored warfare forever, proving that in war, as an evolution, it's not the strongest that survives, but the most adaptable. The German tankers who had once been the hunters learned to fear the long barrel of the Firefly. Allied tankers who had once been prey became predators. And in that reversal lay the ultimate lesson of the Sherman Firefly. In warfare, psychological superiority is often more important than technical superiority. The tank that made German aces afraid had done more than win battles. It had changed the very nature of how wars would be fought on wheels and tracks for generations to come. The tank that changed everything. The story of the Sherman Firefly is ultimately a story about the nature of warfare itself. How innovation born from desperation can fundamentally alter the balance of power. How psychological advantages can be more decisive than technical superiority. And how adaptation, rather than strength, determined survival in the crucible of combat. When the last Firefly rolled off the production line in May 1945, it marked not just the end of a successful modification program, but the conclusion of a revolution in armored warfare that continues to influence military doctrine to this day. The numbers alone tell a remarkable story. From June 1944 to May 1945, approximately 2,100 Sherman Fireflies were produced, a tiny fraction of the over 50,000 Shermans built during the war. Yet these 2,100 tanks achieved a combat effectiveness ratio that far exceeded their numbers. Historical analysis suggests that Fireflies accounted for the destruction of over 500 German Tigers and Panthers, along with countless Panzer IVs and assault guns. When considered against the fact that Germany produced only 1,347 Tiger I tanks and 492 Tiger II tanks during the entire war, the Firefly's impact becomes even more significant. It wasn't just destroying enemy tanks. It was systematically eliminating Germany's qualitative advantage in armored warfare. But the Firefly's true legacy extends far beyond the battlefield statistics. It fundamentally changed how military planners thought about tank warfare. Before the Firefly, the prevailing wisdom held that tank battles would be decided by armor thickness and mechanical reliability. The German Tigers and Panthers, with their thick armor and powerful engines, seemed to validate this theory. The Firefly proved that a relatively simple modification, albeit one requiring considerable engineering ingenuity, could negate years of German technological development. It demonstrated that firepower, particularly the ability to engage at extended ranges, could trump armor protection. This lesson resonated throughout the Cold War era. Both NATO and Warsaw Pact nations prioritized gun performance in their tank designs, leading to the development of smoothbore guns, advanced ammunition types, and fire control systems that could engage targets at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. The modern main battle tank, with its emphasis on first-round hit probability at long range, is a direct descendant of the philosophy the Firefly pioneered. See first, shoot first, kill first. The psychological revolution the Firefly initiated was equally profound. For 4 years, German tank crews had operated with an almost mythical sense of invincibility. They were the knights of the modern battlefield, protected by superior armor and armed with superior weapons. This psychological edge was a force multiplier that went beyond mere technical specifications. German tank crews took risks, pressed attacks, and dominated engagements because they believed in their own invincibility. The Firefly shattered this mythology in the span of a single summer. The transformation in German tank tactics after encountering Fireflies reveals the depth of this psychological shift. Pre-Firefly German doctrine emphasized aggressive, forward attacks, using their superior armor to close with enemy positions. Post-Firefly doctrine stressed caution, concealment, and ambush tactics. German tank commanders who had once led from the front began commanding from covered positions. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. This psychological reversal contributed significantly to the accelerated collapse of German resistance in Western Europe. Veterans' accounts from both sides provide the most compelling evidence of the Firefly's impact. German tank commander Otto Carius, one of the war's most successful tank aces with over 150 kills, wrote in his memoirs, "The appearance of the Firefly meant we could no longer operate as we had. Every distant Sherman was now a potential death threat. The uncertainty was worse than the actual danger." British Firefly Commander John Cloudsley Thompson reflected, "We went from being targets to being hunters. The Germans feared us, and that fear was worth more than a battalion of regular tanks." The Firefly also represents a broader lesson about military innovation. It was not developed through a massive research program or unlimited resources. It was born from necessity, creativity, and the willingness to challenge conventional thinking. When American engineers declared it impossible to mount the 17-pounder in a Sherman turret, British engineers asked not why it couldn't be done, but how it could be done differently. This mindset, solving problems through unconventional thinking rather than accepting limitations, became a hallmark of successful military innovation. The industrial and logistical achievement represented by the Firefly program is often overlooked but equally impressive. Converting over 2,000 tanks while fighting a war, training crews on new equipment, developing new tactical doctrines, and maintaining supply chains for specialized ammunition. All of this was accomplished in less than a year. It demonstrated that democratic nations, often criticized for being slow to adapt, could innovate and implement changes faster than totalitarian regimes when survival was at stake. Perhaps most importantly, the Firefly story challenges our understanding of technological superiority in warfare. The German Tigers and Panthers were, by most objective measures, superior tanks. They had thicker armor, more powerful engines, better optics, and in many cases, superior mechanical design. Yet they were defeated by a modified version of what they dismissively called the Tommy Cooker. The Firefly proved that in warfare, the best weapon is not always the most sophisticated or expensive, but the one that best exploits enemy vulnerabilities. The end of World War II did not mark the end of the Firefly's influence. Military academies worldwide study the Firefly as a case study in successful adaptation and innovation under pressure. The Israeli Defense Forces, facing numerically superior Arab armored forces in their early wars, explicitly cited the Firefly example in developing their own tank warfare doctrine, emphasizing long-range gunnery and tactical flexibility over heavy armor. The success of modified M50 and M51 Super Shermans in Israeli service, mounting French 75mm and 105mm guns respectively, was a direct continuation of the Firefly concept. Today, as military forces worldwide grapple with new challenges, asymmetric warfare, urban combat, unmanned systems, the Firefly's lesson remains relevant. It reminds us that technological superiority is temporary, that innovation can come from unexpected sources, and that the side that adapts fastest often prevails. In an age where military planners obsess over technological superiority, the Firefly stands as a reminder that ingenuity, determination, and adaptability can overcome seemingly insurmountable disadvantages. The Sherman Firefly was more than a tank. It was a symbol of Allied determination, a testament to human ingenuity, and a weapon that changed the very nature of armored warfare. Its long barrel, jutting defiantly from a turret never designed to hold it, became an icon of successful military innovation. In the summer of 1944, when German tank aces learned to fear that distinctive silhouette, the course of the war changed. The Firefly had given the Allies not just a tank that could fight on equal terms, but something more valuable, the confidence that they could overcome any challenge through innovation and adaptation. As we face an uncertain future where military technology evolves at an unprecedented pace, the story of a Sherman Firefly reminds us that victory in warfare often belongs not to those with the best equipment, but to those who best adapt what they have to meet the challenges they face. In that sense, the Firefly's greatest legacy is not the tanks it destroyed or the battles it won, but the timeless lesson it teaches. In war, as in life, innovation, adaptation, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom are the ultimate weapons. The long barrel of the Firefly, reaching across the decades, still points the way forward for military innovators seeking to overcome seemingly impossible odds.